June 4, 1943. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. Unificia ver Burkhart's hand trembled slightly as he scribbled in his hidden diary, recording words that would have earned him solitary confinement if any of his officers discovered them. The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while waging a war on two fronts. Through the train window, Burkhart witnessed a scene that shattered 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Electric lights blazing from every farmhouse, street corner, and shop window. At 10 o'clock at night, the Texas plains stretched before him like an endless constellation of electricity. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the Reich into darkness since 1940, and even before the war, rural electrification had barely reached 20% of farms. Yet here, in what Nazi propaganda had described as a decadent, collapsed America, electricity flowed like water. Stepping down from cushioned Pullman coaches were 1,850 veterans of Irwin RML's Afrika Korps. Not cattle cars, not freight wagons, but trains equipped with dining services and sleeping berths. The entire population of Mahia had turned out to witness their arrival. None of them could have guessed that this moment would trigger a profound psychological transformation, systematically dismantling Nazi ideology through the sheer display of American industrial capacity. The mathematics of Allied victory, it became clear, were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics, ready to shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The collapse had begun on May 13th, 1943, in Tunisia, when General Jurgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The numbers varied as scattered units continued surrendering over several days. Among the captured were the Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself. Among them was Headman Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, a veteran of the France campaign who had been wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, provides historians with the most detailed account of the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. The journey from defeat to revelation began in the port of Oran, Algeria. Radke and 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps, where American efficiency immediately began to crack their preconceptions. Thousands were processed daily with organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even at its peak. Identity cards were photographed and filed, medical examinations completed, inoculations administered, and Geneva Convention rights explained, in fluent German by officers trained specifically for this moment. But the first real shock came with the food. Oberreiter Hans Muir, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later. In the cage at Oran, while waiting for ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. They assumed it was propaganda, an attempt to impress them, never realizing it was standard military ration. The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, a feat that would have been dismissed as impossible propaganda if the Germans had known. These vessels, produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production, returned from supplying the European theater and now carried human cargo, up to 30,000 prisoners per month by summer 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July provided the second phase of psychological demolition. Feld Kurt Zimmerman of the 90th Light Division kept a detailed account in letters to his family after repatriation. He observed that the ship's crew discarded more food waste each day than his entire company had received in weekly rations during the final months in Africa. Half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk, thrown away openly, not to mock, but because to the Americans supply was limitless. The vessel itself became a floating classroom in American power, one of 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war, each requiring 250,000 parts manufactured in 32 states and engines assembled from cylinders produced across 3 separate factories in ports that had barely existed 2 years prior. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stauburn, from a Prussian family with generations of military service, later wrote, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we and perhaps the British possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. It was then he first suspected that Germany had already lost the war." August 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first sight of America shattered the last remnants of Nazi propaganda about American industrial weakness. The base sprawled across 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles, cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in a week. Gerrit Jonveer, a factory worker before conscription, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. Each crane lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses in Germany, moving smoothly, continuously, powered by electricity rather than coal, which in Germany choked entire cities. The prisoners were then formed into columns for the march to the waiting trains. Along the route, they passed parking lots filled with civilian automobiles, hundreds belonging to dock workers. In Germany, private car ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and party elite. The Volkswagen, promised to the German people since 1934, remained a propaganda dream with fewer than 1,000 ever delivered. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work in their own vehicles. Yet nothing prepared them for the trains themselves. Not boxcars, not the infamous 40-and-8 wagons, but full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, and observation cars with panoramic windows. Headman Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." The American guards seemed almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning, a luxury in August, believed to exist only in Hitler's personal train. The 3-day train journey from Norfolk to camps in Texas and Oklahoma became a powerful instrument in dismantling Nazi ideology. As the trains rolled through Virginia, prisoners pressed their faces to the windows, witnessing an America that, according to everything they had been told, could not exist. Every small town blazed with illumination. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, communities that in Germany would have been lucky to have a single street lamp, now displaying glowing shop windows and houses lit in multiple rooms. Factories ran night shifts, their windows aglow, and parking lots remained full even at midnight. Oberg Reiter Mayer, whose father had been a Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, noted in a letter discovered in 1987, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg." The American guards explained that such illumination was normal, as electricity had been widespread in every town since the 1920s. Mayer could hardly believe it. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. Prisoners watched American railway workers complete in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany, thanks to automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, and mechanized lubrication systems. Every aspect of the operation displayed technological superiority. The casual wealth of the workers astounded them. Leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages, soda and glass bottles casually discarded, cigarettes stubbed out mid-smoke. Electrical engineer Heinrich Müller from Siemens calculated that the single railway yard they stopped at used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day. He wrote that the waste was magnificent. Lights burning in empty buildings, electric fans running in vacant rooms, the careless display of infinite resources. As the trains pressed into Tennessee and Kentucky, prisoners witnessed American industrial power in full display. Endless factories stretched to the horizon, larger than anything most had ever seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee extended for 3 miles along the river, with electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts, more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, the train slowed past the Rubbertown complex, where synthetic rubber plants had sprung up from empty fields in just 18 months. For massive facilities, employing thousands, producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, had never produced more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, recognized the implications immediately. I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them in one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country. The trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, visible from miles away. Built in just 9 months, this single factory produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000 parts supplied by 1,500 subcontractors. The plant consumed 2.5 million square feet of floor space and used more electricity than the entire city of Cologne. Luftwaffe pilot Hubman Verli, shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window. He counted 17 B-24s in various stages of assembly. We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat, he later wrote. Yet I could see the precision of the assembly lines. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. The deeper the trains penetrated into America, the more complete the destruction of Nazi mythology became. In St. Louis, the prisoners crossed the Mississippi River on the Eads Bridge. Below, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. Grain elevators stretched along both banks, each holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. Unracia Carl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, noted in his diary, "The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." In Kansas City, the train stopped at a massive stockyard where tens of thousands of cattle awaited slaughter. The smell of the meatpacking plants filled the air for miles. German prisoners, who had subsisted on barely 200 grams of meat per week in Africa, watched American workers eating beef sandwiches during their lunch breaks. Griefer Paul Fisher wrote, "No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. The guard bought us hamburgers from a stand near the station. Meat, cheese, vegetables on white bread for 15 cents. He bought 20 without thinking, paying with a $1 bill. This was not special. This was their normal food." The arrival at the camps themselves provided the next level of cognitive shock. Camp Hearn, Texas, built in just 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. Wooden barracks were equipped with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. Each building had more lumber than entire German villages possessed. The camp hospital astounded medical personnel among the prisoners. Oberst Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. X-ray machines, surgical instruments, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been unavailable in Germany since 1941 were standard for enemy prisoners. Penicillin, Dr. Bauer later testified, was administered freely even for minor infections. In Germany, soldiers died for lack of basic sulfur drugs, yet here Americans provided their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen became another classroom in American prosperity. Prisoners assigned to cooking duties discovered walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of preparing meals for 5,000 men. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, quantities German civilians had not seen since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, wrote, "Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess." American regulations require preparing 10% more than needed to ensure every prisoner receives full rations. The surplus is discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage. By September 1943, labor shortages in American agriculture led to the employment of prisoners in fields and factories across the country. This decision, driven by necessity, proved more destructive to Nazi ideology than any propaganda campaign. Groups of prisoners were trucked daily to work sites, traveling without blindfolds or restricted routes. They saw everything: endless fields of corn and wheat, factories running 3 shifts, stores stocked with goods, parking lots full of cars, and homes equipped with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unratia Herbert Lang observed a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could handle in a month using traditional methods. Powered by electricity from the Colorado River Authority, part of a rural electrification program that had reached 90% of Texas farms by 1943, the gin belonged to an ordinary farmer, not aristocracy, not a party member, who possessed electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including black laborers, ate lunch from boxes containing more food than German workers received in a week. Lang noted, and this was normal. Every farm we passed was the same. In Nebraska, prisoners worked in sugar beet fields, witnessing agricultural mechanization that defied comprehension. A single combine harvester could do the work of 100 men. Fields stretched to the horizon, each larger than entire German counties. The farmers spoke casually of yields that would have been fantasy in Germany: 60 bushels of wheat per acre compared to Germany's 30 on the best land. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working on a farm outside Scottsbluff, wrote, "The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime." When he mentioned this, the boy laughed, saying it was not even a particularly good tractor. His father was waiting for a new model from John Deere that would be even better. The most devastating revelations came to prisoners who worked near or inside American factories. While Geneva Convention rules prohibited direct war production work, POWs could legally work in industries that freed American workers for military production. This technicality allowed thousands of German prisoners to witness American industrial capacity firsthand. At a Campbell Soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners observed production lines processing more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories handled in an entire month. The facility operated with a skeleton crew of women and elderly men, as most young workers were in the military, yet production exceeded peacetime levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Vanner, who had worked in a German food processing plant before the war, documented the experience. Everything was automated: electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, steam cookers that processed hundreds of cans simultaneously. One elderly woman monitored controls that would have required 50 workers in Germany. She did this while listening to a radio and drinking coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant gained glimpses of the automotive industry's conversion to war production. The River Rouge complex, visible across the water, employed 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The plant consumed 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. Oberreiter Franz Kellner wrote, "We could see the parking lots filled with thousands of cars belonging to workers. In Germany, even our officers rarely owned cars. Here, factory workers drove to work. The guard told us many owned 2 cars, one for work and one for family use. We thought he was mocking us." By winter 1943, the cumulative impact of these observations produced what American intelligence officers termed ideological collapse syndrome among prisoners. The Special Projects Division, a secret re-education program run by the Provost Marshal General's office, documented increasing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Noel Ann reported in December 1943, The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. They still maintain loyalty to Germany, but no longer speak of victory. Many openly question what they were told about America. Even camp newspapers, produced by the prisoners themselves, began reflecting this transformation. Dear Roof, the publication at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, gradually shifted from defiant nationalism to discussions of democracy, economic systems, and post-war reconstruction. Editors, carefully selected anti-Nazi prisoners, found their audience increasingly receptive. Lieutenant Hermann Gutz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter intercepted by American monitors, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals." The treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943 further reinforced the ideological shock. Italian POWs who cooperated were placed in Italian service units, receiving better quarters, higher pay, and more freedom. German prisoners watched as their former allies worked alongside Americans, ate in restaurants, and even dated American women. Hetman Friedrich Schultz wrote, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them as allies. They work freely, earn money, send packages home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system." Christmas 1943 delivered one of the most profound psychological impacts. American organizations, churches, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners, enemies who had been fighting American soldiers only months earlier. Each package contained cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners, although regulations prevented most from accepting. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist church choir performed Christmas carols in German for the prisoners. Women from Hearn sent homemade cookies and cakes, and the Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This display of generosity shattered the remaining remnants of Nazi racial theory. Oberleutnant Walter Mueller, whose brother had died in the Hamburg bombings, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power." By early 1944, the transformation among German prisoners was undeniable. Over 40,000 were enrolled in educational programs, studying English, American history, mathematics, and the sciences. Universities, such as the University of Chicago, provided correspondence courses, while Stanford University sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. Prisoners who had been told that Americans were uncultured barbarians discovered libraries with millions of books, universities open to all social classes, and scientific research leading the world. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This generosity of spirit was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology." The camp theaters reinforced the lesson. Prisoners watched Hollywood productions like Gone with the Wind and The Grapes of Wrath, seeing Americans confront failure, self-critique, and social challenges openly. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer noted, "They hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker." In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here, it is considered patriotic. Through work, study, and observation, the prisoners' worldview began to shift. They realized that American industrial and agricultural might was not the product of propaganda, but of organization, ingenuity, and abundance. They saw ordinary citizens living with dignity, enjoying freedoms denied to most in Nazi Germany. They witnessed that prosperity flowed from cooperation, innovation, and democratic principles, not from conquest or racial ideology. By the time news of a Normandy invasion reached the camps on June 6, 1944, the German prisoners had already experienced a profound ideological transformation. They had seen the true scale of American production, the efficiency of its industrial machine, and the humanity of its people. The Nazi myths they had carried into captivity of a decadent, weak, and divided America had been thoroughly dismantled, replaced with an awe-inspiring understanding of what a free, industrious society could achieve.